My father posted about me at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I was sitting at my desk, still in my work clothes, eating leftover rice from a container I hadn't bothered to transfer to a plate. My phone lit up with a notification, a tagged post. I almost didn't open it. I wish I could tell you I had some instinct, some warning in my chest that said, "Brace yourself." But I didn't. I tapped the screen the same way you tap anything, casually, the way you reach for something you assume is harmless. The post had already been up for 11 minutes by the time I saw it. 11 minutes was enough. My father's profile picture, a photo of him at his brother's cookout, holding a beer, grinning the way men grin when they believe the world is still theirs, sat above a caption he had typed himself. It said, and I'm going to read this exactly as he wrote it. Finally doing something about the situation at home. Some adults need to be reminded that 30 years old means grown, tired of carrying dead weight while she hides in her room playing on computers. Changes are coming. Watch this space. Below it, he had tagged my aunt, my cousin, 2 of his friends from the garage, and then, and this is the part that made something go very quiet inside me, he tagged me directly. So every single person in my life who followed him would see it, would see my name, attached to those words, typed by my own father, published like a verdict. It had 43 likes in 11 minutes. I put the rice container down slowly, the way you put something down when your hands are no longer entirely sure what they are doing. I read the post again. Then I scrolled the comments. A man I had met once at a family barbecue wrote, "Good for you, Mark. Tough love." My aunt, the one my father had tagged first, replied with a string of laughing emojis and added, "About time." Someone I didn't recognize commented, "These grown kids think the world owes them something." My cousin, who is 26 and has lived with his mother his entire life, wrote, "Embarrassing." 31 comments in 11 minutes. I sat at my desk and read every single one. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The only thing I did, quietly, methodically, with a stillness I didn't know I possessed until that moment, was take screenshots. Every comment, every reaction, every laughing face attached to a name I recognized. I saved them in a folder I labeled with that night's date and moved them to my cloud backup, which automatically copied to a second location. That was a habit from work. You document everything before the noise starts. Once things get loud, evidence gets complicated. My father's post climbed through the night. By midnight, it had over 200 interactions. By morning, it was sitting at nearly 400, and somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., while I was awake and watching it refresh from my bed, my cousin had shared it to his own page with the caption, "My uncle is finally setting boundaries in his own house, LOL." A woman from my father's church commented that she'd pray for our family. A man who worked at the garage wrote that some people just need to be shown the door. I read every word. I did not comment. Not once. I did not send my father a message. I did not call my aunt. I did not text my cousin. I sat in the silence of my own room, in the house I had been living in for 7 years. The house where I had quietly, invisibly, kept more things functioning than anyone around me had bothered to notice. And I watched my father perform for an audience that did not know the full picture. Not even close. That was their first mistake, not understanding who they were actually dealing with. Before I tell you what I found out the next morning, and what I quietly put into motion over the following 2 weeks, pause for 1 second and tell me, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. Okay, now let me tell you what nobody in that comment section knew. My name is Nadia. I am 31 years old, and for the past 4 years I have been a senior financial compliance analyst for a regional investment firm that manages accounts across 3 states. I work primarily from home. I work long hours. I work in the kind of focused silence that looks, to anyone watching from the outside, like doing nothing. I wear comfortable clothes at my desk, I drink too much coffee. I am usually on my second screen by 7 a.m. and sometimes still on my first call past 9 p.m. What I do, stripped of the technical language, is this. I audit financial structures. I find where money moves that shouldn't move, where documentation is missing, where exposure exists. I protect firms from regulatory consequences and from themselves. I am very good at it. I have been very good at it for a long time, and the salary that comes with being very good at it is not something my father, who runs a small auto parts distributorship out of a rented warehouse on the edge of town, has ever bothered to ask about. He assumed. They all assumed. The closed door, the multiple screens, the headphones, the odd hours. In their minds, it all added up to someone avoiding the world, someone who had failed to launch, someone who had built a comfortable hiding place inside their home and called it a life. What they never considered was that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes the person who says the least in the room is the one who already knows the most. But let me back up, because the post was not the beginning of this story. It was just the first time they made their private opinion public, and that distinction matters more than anything else I will tell you today. I moved back home 7 years ago, when my grandmother, my father's mother, a woman named Estelle who smelled like lavender and kept records of everything in a green ledger she carried in her bag, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of kidney disease. She was 68. She lived alone in the house that my father had grown up in, a 4-bedroom property that she had owned outright since my grandfather passed in 2009. She had no mortgage. She had savings. She had a life she had built carefully and protected stubbornly against every attempt by the people around her to borrow, beg, or barter pieces of it away. My grandmother needed someone. Not a nurse, she had her pride about that, but someone present, someone organized, someone who would manage her appointments and her medications and the constant rotating paperwork that a serious illness generates without apology. My father had a business to run. My mother, who had been divorced from my father for a decade by that point, was not in the picture for this particular crisis. My uncle lived 4 hours away and visited twice a year on schedule, like a subscription you keep forgetting to cancel. My aunt sent cards. I came home. I told my employer at the time that I needed a flexible arrangement, and they agreed because I had been delivering results they could not easily replace. I set up my workstation in the second bedroom of my grandmother's house. I learned her medication schedule until I could recite it in my sleep. I drove her to appointments at 6:30 in the morning. I sat in waiting rooms with bad lighting and chairs designed by someone who had never needed to wait for anything. I held her hand during the conversations that were too important to be had alone. My father visited on Sundays, sometimes. He would sit in the kitchen, drink her coffee, and tell her she looked good even when she didn't. Then he would go home. I do not say this with bitterness anymore. I say it because it is accurate, and because accuracy matters when you are trying to understand how a story reaches its ending. When my grandmother died, 16 months after her diagnosis, she did so in the room where she had slept for 40 years, with the windows open the way she liked them, in the early hours of a Thursday morning. I was in the house. I was the one who called everyone else. I made the arrangement she had pre-planned in a manila folder labeled "For When" that she had shown me 2 months before. She had thought of everything. She had typed it herself, printed it, organized it in page order with a binder clip, and placed it where someone responsible would find it. She had also done something else, something that would not become fully visible until much later, something she had told me about in a conversation I had nearly forgotten until an envelope arrived in my name about 8 weeks after her funeral. My grandmother had made a will, but more importantly, she had made a trust, a revocable living trust that she had structured with the help of an estate attorney in the years after my grandfather died, then updated quietly, without announcement, approximately 14 months before her diagnosis, as if some part of her had known to start preparing. The family house, which she had owned free and clear, was placed in that trust. So was a small rental property she held in another part of town. So was a savings account that nobody had known the balance of, because my grandmother did not share financial information with people who spent money as a hobby. The trust named an executor, a trustee, the person responsible for managing the assets, making decisions about the properties, and ensuring everything was handled according to her instructions. She named me. Not my father, who was her son, not my uncle, who was older, not any of the Sunday visitors or card senders or people who had delivered casseroles to the door and considered that equal to presents. She named me. And when I sat in the estate attorney's office and heard the scope of what that meant, the legal authority it carried, the property control it conveyed, the quiet, documented weight of it, I understood something about my grandmother that I had always suspected but never had confirmed in writing. She had been paying very close attention, for a very long time, to who actually showed up. I moved into the family house after she passed because it needed someone there, because the rental property needed oversight, because there were financial accounts that required management, tax filings that required accuracy, maintenance decisions that required judgment, and because my father, who had by then remarried, moved into a house on the other side of town with his wife Donna and taken on her 2 adult children as part of the package, had made it clear, in the casual, unself-conscious way of people who have never been responsible for anything they didn't choose, that he had his hands full. So I stayed, and I kept things running, and I paid for things that needed paying, and I filed what needed filing, and I renewed what needed renewing, and I fixed what quietly broke before it became a problem anyone else would notice. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because my grandmother had trusted me with something she had spent decades building, because the house still smelled like her in certain rooms on certain days, and I was not ready for it to become someone else's problem. And I did it, if I am being fully honest, because I did not know yet how to distinguish between love and labor when both come wrapped in the same obligation. That confusion cost me years. During those years, my father's opinion of me hardened into something that stopped resembling observation and started resembling mythology. I worked odd hours, therefore I was lazy. I did not attend every family gathering, therefore I was antisocial. I did not explain my work in terms he recognized, therefore I had no real work. I kept the house in good condition, paid the taxes, handled the legal administration of the trust, but none of that was visible in the way that a 9-to-5 and a nameplate and a firm handshake at a company party would have been visible. So it didn't count. In the family story, I was the one who hadn't figured herself out yet. I was potential that hadn't materialized. I was 31 and still there, which meant, to people who had stopped asking questions, that something must have gone wrong. They told that story for so long they forgot it was a story. By the time my father wrote that post, he believed every word of it, the way you believe something you have repeated enough times that the telling feels like memory. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the past several months preparing to leave. Not running, not escaping. Leaving deliberately, on a schedule I had set, with a plan I had constructed the same way I construct anything important, methodically, completely, with every contingency accounted for. I had found an apartment in a converted textile building 20 minutes away, signed a lease, paid the deposit, arranged movers, set a move date. I had notified the appropriate parties about changes to the trust administration going forward. I had begun the formal documentation process with the estate attorney, a measured, careful woman named Patricia, who had known my grandmother for 20 years and treated her paperwork with the seriousness of something sacred, to ensure that my transition away from the property did not create any legal ambiguity. I was 3 weeks from my move date when my father posted. He did not know I was leaving. He did not know about the lease. He did not know about the movers. And he certainly did not know, because he had never once asked, not in 7 years, what the trust documents actually said, that the house he had been dropping by on Sundays, the house where he had hosted his brothers in the backyard and his church friends in the kitchen and his wife Donna for holiday dinners, was not, legally his to host anyone in. That his occupancy of it, his casual, assumed, permanent-feeling occupancy, existed because I had extended him a courtesy that the trust permitted me to extend, and that I could, with appropriate notice, withdraw. He thought he was posting about a dependent daughter who had overstayed her welcome. He was, without knowing it, publicly insulting the person who administered his access to the only property in the family that had any significant value. I spent the night after the post sleeping in 4-hour segments, the way I always sleep when my mind is working problems in the background. In the morning, I made coffee, sat at my desk, and opened my documentation folder. I already had the screenshots from the night before. Now I added the continued comments from overnight. The pile had grown past 500 interactions by 7 a.m. and began a written log. Date, time, platform, content, reach. Because I work in compliance. Because I understand that documentation is not aggression. It is simply preparation for a world that doesn't always behave the way it should. Then I called Patricia. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting my call, or something like it, for a while. I described the post. I read some of the comments. I told her about the tags, the reach, the named humiliation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I'm going to ask you." "Whether I'm ready to move forward," I said. "Are you?" I looked out the window at the yard my grandmother had tended for 30 years, the rose bushes she had planted in a specific order she had explained to me once, in the kind of detail that made clear she expected someone to continue them properly. "Yes," I said. Patricia's voice, when it shifted into professional mode, was like watching a door close quietly and lock. "Then let's talk about what the trust documents actually allow." And there it was, the thing I had been sitting on for 7 years. Not out of strategy, not out of malice, but out of something that had felt, for a long time, like loyalty. My grandmother's trust was explicit. The family home could be occupied by my father and any members of his household with my knowledge and permission, under what the document called a revocable accommodation arrangement. That arrangement could be withdrawn under specific conditions: failure to maintain the property, conduct that created legal or financial liability for the trust, or behavior that constituted harassment, public defamation, or reputational harm directed at the acting trustee. The acting trustee was me. The post naming me by first name and last initial, describing me as dead weight, tagging me to 400-plus public interactions, and generating community-level public mockery directed at a named individual, constituted, in Patricia's measured legal opinion, textbook grounds for review of the accommodation arrangement, not grounds for drama, grounds for documentation, formal notice, and a timeline. She drafted the notice that afternoon. I read it twice, changed 2 words, and authorized her to proceed. The notice went out by certified mail on Thursday morning. It informed my father, as a current occupant of a trust-administered property, that a formal review of his accommodation status had been initiated in response to documented conduct. It requested removal of specific online content. It outlined a 30-day review period. It was 4 pages, single-spaced, in the kind of language that makes the air in a room feel different. I know the notice arrived on Friday because at 11:22 Friday morning, while I was on a call with a colleague reviewing a quarterly audit, my phone started vibrating on my desk and did not stop for 4 minutes. My father called 6 times. My aunt called twice. A number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Donna, my stepmother, calling from her cell instead of his, called 3 times. My cousin sent a text that said only, "What is happening?" I silenced my phone, finished my audit call, and then sat for a moment in the quiet of my own competence. The kind of quiet that arrives when you have been preparing for something so long that when it finally arrives, there is almost no adrenaline left. Just clarity. I texted Patricia. "The mail arrived?" She texted back. "I know. They called the office. I'll handle it." I went back to work. The weekend was a study in escalation that had nothing to do with me, which is the most interesting kind. My father, and I learned this later through my cousin, who felt guilty enough about the original post to start talking, gathered the family for what he described as an emergency. Donna was there, my aunt, my uncle, who had driven in from 4 hours away specifically for this, which told me everything about how seriously he was finally taking something. My cousin, several people I had not spoken to in years, all assembled in the living room of the house where I had spent 7 years maintaining the utilities and property taxes and trust filings they had never thought to ask about. My father, apparently, had printed out the notice. He read it to them, and in the reading, certain things became apparent that had not been apparent before. That the house was not, legally, his. That the trust existed. That my grandmother had created it, signed it, and named me in it, and that this had been true since before any of them had ever thought to wonder. That the occupancy arrangement, the thing that allowed him to live in his mother's house, to have Donna's children over for holidays, to park in the driveway and mow the yard he called his own, was not ownership. It was permission. Permission I had extended for 7 years without mentioning it, and that was now under formal review. By Sunday afternoon, the original Facebook post had been deleted, not edited, deleted, as had 3 comments my father had left on his own post, and one that my aunt had contributed. My cousin sent me a message that said, "I deleted mine too. I'm really sorry, Nadia. I didn't know any of that." I appreciated that one. I didn't respond to it, but I appreciated it. Monday morning, Patricia's office received a call from my father requesting a meeting. She scheduled it for Wednesday. She asked whether I wanted to attend. I said yes, but I wanted to choose the location. She said that was not only fine, but strategically appropriate. We agreed on her conference room. Neutral ground with the weight of a law office behind it. No kitchens, no driveways, no living rooms where memory could be used as furniture. I spent Tuesday evening preparing a folder. Not a dramatic one. Not a theatrical presentation designed to humiliate, just a clean, organized record of what had happened and what had been true. The post, printed and dated. The comment, screenshots. The trust summary Patricia had prepared, with the relevant clauses highlighted in yellow. A simple, 1-page financial summary. Amounts I had contributed over 7 years to the property. Tax payments, maintenance costs, insurance gaps I had quietly covered, a plumbing emergency, a roof assessment, numbers, dates, clean columns. I did not add anything unnecessary. I did not include things designed to make anyone feel small. I included only what was accurate, because accuracy was the point. I had learned, through years of compliance work, that the most devastating thing you can present to someone who has underestimated you is not a weapon. It is a record. Wednesday came overcast and cool. I arrived at Patricia's office 12 minutes early, which is how I arrive everywhere. I wore the same dark blazer I wear to professional reviews, because this was a professional review, regardless of the last names involved. I set my folder on the table, accepted a glass of water, and waited. My father arrived with Donna, which I had not expected. She sat slightly behind him and to the right, the way people sit when they are present for support but have agreed beforehand not to speak first. My aunt came too, which I also had not expected, and which told me the family had decided there was safety in numbers. There is rarely safety in numbers when the other side has documentation. My father looked, and this is the only word that fits, diminished. Not physically. He is a large man, broad across the shoulders, the kind of presence that fills a room by occupying space confidently. But Wednesday morning, in that conference room, with Patricia's framed credentials on the wall and my folder on the table, He looked like someone who had walked into a building expecting one conversation and found himself in an entirely different one. He opened with the only thing he had available, which was emotion. "Nadia, I don't understand why we're here. I'm your father. Whatever all this is, we're family. You don't do this to family." I let the sentence finish. I did not fill the silence that came after it. That is something I have learned in 7 years of professional meetings. Silence belongs to whoever is most comfortable inside it. "You posted about me publicly," I said. "You named me. You tagged me. You invited hundreds of people to laugh at me in my own home. That's where this started." "It was frustration," he said. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "What were you trying to do?" He opened his mouth. He did not have an answer that worked. I opened my folder and slid the printed copy of the post across the table toward him. He looked at it the way people look at things they hoped had stopped existing. "I have documentation of 412 individual public interactions with that post," I said. "Names I recognize, names I don't. Comments about my character, my work ethic, my adulthood. You tagged me to all of it. I want you to understand that I am not here because I am angry. I am here because I am done." Donna put her hand on his arm. My aunt leaned forward and started to say something. Patricia raised one hand, just slightly, just enough, and my aunt stopped. I slid the trust summary next. I watched my father read the clause that outlined the trustee's authority. I watched him read the clause about revocable accommodation. I watched his face do the thing that faces do when a story a person has been living inside for years reveals itself to have a different architecture than they believed. It is not quite shock. It is something slower and more specific. It is the recognition that reality was never the thing they were told it was, and that the gap between the story and the truth has been there all along, silent and waiting, long before this room. "She never told me," he said, quietly. No accusation in it, just that. "She told me," I said, "because I was there." Donna looked at her hands. My aunt looked at the window. My father looked at the table for a long moment before he looked up at me. "What do you want?" he asked. I had thought about how to answer that question for 3 days, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to say it cleanly, without excess, without the accumulated weight of 7 years pressing through every word. "I want to move forward with my plans," I said. "I've signed a lease. I'm moving in 3 weeks. I want the accommodation review to conclude without escalation, which means I need 2 things from you. First, written confirmation that all online content referencing me has been removed permanently. Patricia will verify. Second, I need to understand that going forward, trust administration happens through this office, not through family pressure, guilt, or phone calls to my cell at 11 in the morning." My father was quiet. Then, "And the house?" "The house remains under trust administration while I evaluate next steps," I said. "That evaluation will take the time it takes. It will be conducted properly, without interference." "So we could lose it," Donna said, her first words of the meeting. "That depends," I said, "on what the evaluation determines and what options exist." I looked at her directly. "It has always depended on that. Udger didn't know it." The meeting lasted 47 minutes. My father did not raise his voice. My aunt left with less certainty than she arrived with, which is the most I had ever seen her uncertainty cost her. Donna cried quietly at one point, and then composed herself in the careful way of someone who has decided composure is more useful than emotion in this particular room. My father signed the written acknowledgement that Patricia had prepared, confirming that the posts had been removed and that contact outside legal channels about trust matters would constitute a violation of the review agreement. He signed it with the pen Patricia handed him, in the careful print of a person making sure the letters are legible. When it was done, when they had stood and gathered their things and moved toward the door with the specific quiet of people who came for one outcome and received another, my father stopped. He turned back. He looked at me across the conference table with an expression I had never seen from him before. It was not apology exactly. It was something more complicated than apology. It was the face of a person seeing someone clearly, perhaps for the first time, and not being certain what to do with what they see. "I didn't know," he said. "About your grandmother. About all of it. I didn't know what you were doing." "I know," I said. "You never asked." He nodded once. Then he left. I sat in that conference room for a few minutes after they were gone. Patricia refilled my water glass without being asked, which is the kind of human gesture that lands differently after a hard thing than at any other time. I did not cry in the conference room. I cried in my car in the parking structure a block away, briefly and productively, the way you cry when something is finally over. Then I drove home, to the apartment with the big windows and the street noise, and the walls I had not yet put anything on because I had not yet decided what I wanted to look at. I made tea. I sat on my couch. I opened my laptop and checked my work inbox, which contained 17 new messages and a calendar invite for a Thursday debrief. I answered 2 of the emails. I accepted the invite. I closed the laptop. I thought about my grandmother, about the green ledger she carried, about the trust documents in her careful handwriting and the estate attorney she had chosen, and the 14-month window in which she had made these decisions before telling a single soul. She had known exactly what she was doing. She had known exactly who would show up and who would not, who would sit in waiting rooms at 6:30 in the morning, and who would say that hospitals made them uncomfortable. She had decided, in the quiet arithmetic of a woman who had spent decades watching people reveal themselves, that love without presence is not the kind of love worth building a legal document around. She built it around me. I was still learning to believe I deserved that. 3 weeks later, I moved. The movers came at 8 a.m., professional and efficient, and by noon, the rooms I had lived in for 7 years were empty in the way rooms go empty. Not abandoned, just released. I walked through once before leaving. My grandmother's rose bushes were blooming in the yard, small and particular and stubbornly alive, the way she had been. I took a photograph of them. I did not post it. The evaluation of the trust properties is ongoing. I have not made any final decisions about the family house. What I have decided is that every decision I make going forward will be made from a position of clarity rather than obligation, from actual consideration rather than inherited guilt, from the part of me that knows the difference between love and labor, and finally, refuses to treat them as the same thing. The calls continued for about 10 days after the meeting. My father, twice, brief and awkward, and reaching for something he did not quite have the vocabulary for yet. My aunt once, beginning with a sigh so practiced it had lost all its air. My cousin, genuinely, checking in the way young people do when they have witnessed something they are still processing. I answered my cousin. I listened. I said very little, but I meant what I said. A woman from the neighborhood, someone who had commented favorably on my father's original post, one of the encouraging tone ones about tough love, sent a message to a mutual contact saying she hoped the family was healing. I read that message and marveled briefly at the human capacity to be a participant in someone's humiliation and then express hope for their healing, as if those two facts had nothing to do with each other. I did not respond to that one either. Not because I was punishing anyone, because I have learned that not every performance requires an audience. Here's the thing I want to leave you with, and I mean this not as a conclusion, not as a lesson written for the end of a video, but as something I genuinely believe and have genuinely earned the right to say. The people who are loudest about your failures are often the people most dependent on your silence. They build their certainty about who you are on the assumption that you will keep absorbing it, that you will keep showing up, keep covering the gaps, Keep translating their cruelty into something manageable, because the alternative, standing still and letting them see who you actually are, feels too dangerous. It is dangerous. That part is real. Standing in your own truth in front of people who have decided what your truth is allowed to be costs something that cannot be fully described. It costs in the middle of the night and on the drives home, and in the specific ache of realizing that the people who were supposed to know you best never bothered to try. But here is what I know now, sitting in an apartment with big windows and walls I am slowly, deliberately filling with things I actually chose. The person my family thought I was could not have survived what I have survived. She was not real. She was the story they told because it was convenient. The person I actually am. The one who sat in oncology waiting rooms at 6:30 in the morning and audited financial structures at midnight and documented everything in folders with dates and kept 7 years of quiet promises to a woman who trusted her with something irreplaceable. That person was never the one they were describing. My father made me a joke online because he believed I had no power. 2 weeks later, his relationship with the only property my grandmother ever owned was under formal legal review. Those two facts are connected, but not in the way he imagined when he typed that post, not as revenge, as consequence, as the natural, inevitable result of a world that runs on documentation and reality, no matter how long it takes for the people around you to catch up. If the people in your life have decided who you are, and they decided a long time ago, and they have not asked a single question since, let me ask you what I wish someone had asked me years earlier. What are they missing? What have they assumed? What have you been carrying quietly that they would not recognize if they held it? Because I promise you this, the work you do in silence does not disappear. It accumulates, it builds, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the moment arrives when the people who spent years performing certainty about your limitations discover that the floor beneath their certainty was yours all along. My father let everyone mock me online. 2 weeks later, they were calling non-stop. Those are the same story. And the story is not about me being smarter or luckier or more powerful. It is about what happens when a person finally stops protecting people from the truth of who they chose to be. If you are still carrying people who have decided you are small, stop explaining, stop defending, stop absorbing. Just document and wait. The truth has very good timing when you stop getting in its way.